guys, Olive here today to bring you my June 2017 wrap-up and my July TBR. June was a mixed bag of a month for me in a myriad of ways, but I actually surprisingly got a lot of reading done. The first book I finished in June was called Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. This is a YA retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's kind of Rosamund Hodge's style for her books. She does fairy tale retellings, but with a dark twist. I read Crimson Bound early in 2016. That book was a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. I really enjoyed that book, and I liked this one nearly as much. Think a darker, uprooted, but with Greek mythology thrown in. The story follows a teenage girl named Nyx. She has been promised to marry the evil demon lord of her region because her father made a bad bet with this demon years prior. Nyx has been trained her entire life to avenge this bad bet and to kill the demon lord once she is able to get close enough to him. If you know the story of Beauty and the Beast, you probably know how this story goes after she marries him. But even though I knew it was coming, I just got swept away by this book. Judging by some of the Goodreads reviews I've seen for Rosamund Hodge's books, I know not everyone is a fan of her, but her books are like candy to me. When I am in the mood for one, I just devour it. It also helps that her books go super quickly, especially when I'm listening on audiobook, and when I'm listening to one of her books, it's literally all I want to do. Is it a super challenging book? No. Is it perfect? Certainly not. But was it fun, and did it provide some much needed escapism? You bet. The next book was a quick read that I picked up at the library, and that was Pen and Ink, Tattoos and the Stories Behind Them. This is a book composed of short passages, giving the stories behind tattoos of real life people who are writers in some form or another. On the opposite page from each of these short passages is an illustrated version of the tattoo in question. For example, it was really cool and sometimes really touching reading the stories behind these people's tattoos. I thought it was an appropriate time to pick this up at the library considering I just got my own first tattoo that I won't shut up about. Because I just got the tattoo so recently and because it means so much to me, I felt very connected to this book. I know there's another book like this. I guess it's kind of a series. That one's called Knives and Ink, about the tattoos that chefs have and what they mean to them. Jenny King read and reviewed that and said she really liked it, so I'm gonna have to pick up that one as well. As you may already know, I did a reread of Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, which I am now calling my favorite book of all time. I did a discussion video all about how you go about choosing your one top favorite book out of all your favorites. In that video, I also talk about the connection I feel to this book. So I will link that down below if you'd like to hear me gush about this. The next book I finished in June was June by Miranda Beverly Whittemore. Before I even started on BookTube, I read and loved Bittersweet by the same author. So I was really looking forward to picking this book up. I tried to read this one last summer, but ran out of time with my library copy because it was a new release and I couldn't renew it. So recently I bought my own copy and suggested to Jenny that we buddy read it together and was very excited about it. This is a historical fiction novel that hops back and forth in time between the present day, 2015, and 1955. In the present day, we follow a 20-something-year-old girl named Cassie. She is aboard the struggle bus, living in a large mansion in Ohio that she has recently inherited from her grandmother who has just died. Out of the blue, some random dude knocks on her door and tells her that a famous movie star from the golden age of Hollywood has just died and left her, a complete stranger, his entire fortune. As some of the facts start to come to light, it seems as though this famous movie star, Jack Montgomery, had, way back in the day, had a relationship with her grandmother, June. In the present day sections, we are following Cassie and Jack Montgomery's children who have made their way to Ohio wondering what the hell is up with this situation, and their efforts to find out why Jack would leave his entire fortune to a stranger. Then the flashback sections to 1955 follow June, her very close childhood friend Lindy, and the movie that is being shot in their small town, of which Jack Montgomery is the star. It started off rather promising, but very quickly became over the top. It had an extremely unrealistic story and several chemistry-less romances, like really sterile. I ended up hate reading the last third of this book, Partly out of morbid curiosity and partly because it was a buddy read, there are much better historical fiction novels out there. This one is best avoided. The next book I finished in June was The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. The title of this book refers to the lecture that Carnegie Mellon professor Randy Pausch gave after learning he had terminal cancer. This is a book about the content of that lecture and about his process writing it and giving it. He says in this book that his motives for giving the lecture were not just about himself and the way it would make him feel, but that he had a real desire to leave something behind for his children. Randy Pausch had 3 very young children when he found out that he was going to die from cancer. And so he felt as though he had so much wisdom, so many life lessons that he wasn't going to be around to teach his children in their later lives. So he outlined them in this lecture that he gave and in this book that he wrote. He discusses many life experiences and life lessons that he learned during his short time on Earth in such a touchingly optimistic way. It was a very emotional listen at times, especially when he was describing how much he wished he could be there to see his children grow up. There are a lot of valuable and poignant lessons in this book. Unfortunately, at this point in my life, I feel like I have learned some of these lessons the hard way already. I feel as though this would probably be a great gift to a high school graduate, someone who's going to be starting off in the world and could use some perspective like this. Just because I have learned some of these lessons the hard way already does not mean I did not get anything out of this. It really did give me some perspective that I really needed at the time. And although this book could be very sad at times, it was such a pleasure hearing the anecdotes and wisdom from someone who was so incredibly genuine. Definitely worth a read. The next book I finished in June, unfortunately, ended up being a major disappointment. That was The Prestige by Christopher Priest. This was a book that I put on my TBR before starting BookTube, right after I finished and loved The Night Circus. I wanted something, anything, that was going to make me feel the way The Night Circus did. I saw people all over the internet singing the praises of how this book does magical competition even better than The Night Circus does it. I was the most excited when I found this used copy at a book sale that I went to last year. I put off reading this book for 4 long years because I just knew I was going to love it. Then, during the month of May, in a particularly retrospective moment, I was thinking back over my reading for the first half of 2017 and realizing that I wasn't getting along with most of the novels I had read so far. I decided to pluck something off of my shelves that I knew I was going to love, and I picked this one. I now have trust issues. This is a book about a competition between magicians in the late 19th century, when one more experienced magician sorta kinda accidentally offends another in the midst of his act. It sparks the most boring feud imaginable, and the two struggle to outwit each other through the remainder of their careers. The way they choose to compete with one another is trying to outdo each other when it comes to the machinery that they're using in their acts. And this author is very concerned that you know exactly how all of that machinery works. But listen, I'm not an engineer. And if I wanted to read a Tesla biography, I would have just done that. Just to make it abundantly clear to you fellow fans of The Night Circus who still may be interested, this is not a fantasy book. This is a sci-fi novel with some supernatural elements that is unforgivably boring. I truly believe in the depths of my soul that I was so disappointed in that book that it had fallout in my next 2 reads. The first of those being The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan. This is the second book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. I just didn't think this one had the same energy that the first one did. I wasn't as engaged with it. It very well may be that I just fell out of the mood to read this book and forced myself through it anyway, which was probably a mistake. I honestly don't know if I'm going to continue going with this series. I'm going to see how I feel several months down the line. The other book that suffered the fallout of my disappointment was First Bite, How We Learn to Eat by B. Wilson. First of all, I listened to this book on audiobook, and while it's probably not fair to judge the quality of a book based on a grievance with the audiobook narrator. She had one of the most irritating voices I've ever heard in my life. This was marketed as a book that discusses the development of food tastes and preferences starting from when you are a very young child. Being someone who is interested in science, it seemed to me as though it would be a book about the science of taste. The book very briefly touched upon that in the beginning sections, but then took a hard right and became a book all about children. The development of food preferences in children, the history of feeding children, how children develop bad food habits. If I had kids, I'm sure I would feel more engaged by this. I would feel that the knowledge that I'm acquiring would be able to be put to good use with my own children. But I do not have children, and thus this book was just not for me. If you do have children and are interested in the subject matter, or if you're trying to get them to eat a wider variety of foods, I would recommend that you pick this up. The penultimate book I read this month finally broke the cycle of disappointment. That book was Seinfeldia, How a Show About Nothing Changed Everything by Jennifer Cation Armstrong. This is a fun, engaging, and information-packed book all about the iconic 90s television show Seinfeld. In the book, you learn about the genesis of the show, the casting, the real lives of the actors who play all the characters, the real-life people who inspired some of the characters, the writers, the process of making an episode, the fights to keep the show on the air in the early days, and then in later years, against all odds, how the show became an enormous success for the network. There's also a whole discussion of the life the show took on, especially when it went off the air. The show straddled the line between fiction and reality so successfully by basing characters, places, storylines on real life people, places, and things. By doing so, the author argues that Seinfeld created its own little universe, which she lovingly names Seinfeldia. If you are a hardcore fan of Seinfeld, it is a must-read. But even if you're just a casual watcher like myself, it is so much fun. And the very last book that I finished in June was The Party by Elizabeth Day. I'm not going to talk about my feelings on this book just yet. I'm planning a full review of this book, so keep an eye out for that. I am still currently reading 2 books from June's TBR that I am hoping to finish up here shortly. The first book I'm working on finishing is The Episodic Career: How to Thrive at Work in the Age of Disruption by Farai Chideya. And I'm also working on finishing up the random pick off of my TBR for June, which is In the Land of Invented Languages by Erika Ockrent. Now on to the books that I would like to add to my July TBR, the first being If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This was on my vacation TBR. This one and a number of others were not able to be read because the vacation did not go as expected. I would at least like to read this one during the month of July, if not a few others that were on the vacation TBR. I would also like to read this chunker of a book, Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. I'm planning on doing a buddy read of A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery. And off of the list of classics that I wanted to read during the year of 2017, I'm hoping to read Appointment in Samara by John O'Hara. And the last book on my TBR for July, not including any readathon selections that may happen later in the month, will be my random pick off of my TBR. If you've not seen me do this, what I do is take a random number generator to pick 3 different books off of my to-read shelf on Goodreads. I then select one of those 3 options to put on my TBR for the month. Option number 1 is one I know I own somewhere. Let me try to find that. It was tucked in the corner of the shelf up there, but it's I, Elizabeth by Rosalind Miles. Option number 2 is some translated Russian literature called The Time Night by Ludmila Petrushevskaya. And option number 3 is another one I had on my shelves. That is The Beak of the Finch by Jonathan Weiner. I'm very interested in picking up I, Elizabeth, but because I'm already reading some long books this month, I think I'm going to go with The Time Night. I know Michael from Knowledge Lost will probably be pleased with this development. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I read in June, what I'm still currently reading, and what I'm planning to read in July. If you'd like to talk to me about any of these books or anything in general, you can put it in the comment section below, or you can find me on a variety of places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.